Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larson. Today on the show, we've got Dave Kerpen.
So much of what I have been able to write and put out into the world is super, super simple. Like, I'm the first to say that none of my books are rocket science. In fact, I happen to have a copy of Likeable Social Media. And I'll tell you that Seth Godin, one of my just mentors and just a terrific person that I look up to, he wrote about Likeable Social Media.
Dave, thanks for making time.
Thanks for having me.
So, chairman of Likeable Media, New York Times bestselling author, entrepreneur. Why don't you give us the 30-second elevator pitch on yourself?
Sure, 30 seconds. I consider myself a serial entrepreneur and an author and speaker. I actually currently am responsible for 3 companies, which is pretty crazy but fun. Likeable Media is our primary firm, social media marketing for big brands. Likeable Local is a software company for small businesses. And Uma Health is my newest venture. It's a mental health marketplace that connects clients with therapists. I've written 4 books, most recently Art of People, 11 simple people skills that will get you everything you want. And I guess my most important job of all is father to 3 and husband to my brilliant business partner and wife, Carrie.
That's awesome. So, and you've got another book coming out this coming year, yes?
Yeah, well, it's the 3rd edition to my first book and the best-selling book of all of mine. It's called Likeable Social Media, how to amaze your customers, create an irresistible brand, and be generally amazing on all the social networks that matter. And that, when you write a social media book, it has to be updated every couple of years. Otherwise, it becomes out of date pretty quickly. So this is the 3rd edition that we're doing that'll come out in February of 19.
Well, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So, you speak all over the place, you're advising all sorts of clients. What's something that you feel like you've learned by doing all this that you wouldn't have learned any other way than by actually doing it yourself?
Yeah, I think there's been lots and lots of lessons because there've been lots and lots of mistakes along the way. And sometimes mistakes are the best teachers for us. I would say the most important lessons I've learned are all about people. And hiring slow and firing fast, and trusting your gut when it comes to people. I've hired a lot of the wrong people along the way, and I've had to make some major changes, and really thinking about the importance of culture and core values when it comes to people, especially leaders. Sometimes the smartest person is not the best person for the job, and sometimes the person who looks best on paper is not the best person for the job, and sometimes the person that has the most credentials is not the best person for the job. And I've made lots of mistakes along those lines. Some of these mistakes that unfortunately I've made more than I'd like to admit, but I think hopefully with each time you get a little bit better, and I learn a little bit more about how to better, choose the right people, and more important when I do choose the wrong people, which is bound to happen, kind of making a change sooner rather than later.
Yeah, so I'm terrible at that. I'm the guy that's like always trying to give him one more chance, and I'm just frustrating the whole rest of our team. Or why is this person still with us? Any advice for folks like me?
It's probably the biggest mistake that I see in entrepreneurs and business leaders everywhere. It's like, and the major reason from a psychological perspective is cognitive dissonance. So what happens is we make a choice about somebody, and then even if our gut is telling us that maybe we made the wrong choice, instead of admitting that we were wrong, we rationalize to ourselves and try to convince ourselves, no, we made the right choice. It's just this. They just need to be moved to this department. They just need this coaching. They just need this, method. And so we try to convince ourselves. But in our deepest, in the corners of our mind, in our really deep gut, we kind of always know when we messed up, but we just don't necessarily act on that as quickly as we should.
Yeah. Any stories from your own life of when you learned that lesson?
Man, the story that's the sharpest is the series of sales leaders that I went through at Likeable Local, our software company I mentioned earlier. The first, I'm very good at sales myself, so it's an area that I assume that I don't necessarily need the very best person, and so I think I've made a lot of mistakes along the way, right? So the first sales leader I had was a really good salesperson, but I talk talk about core values and lack of culture fit. He was not only a drug addict doing cocaine, he was actually recruiting others to sell under him that were also using drugs, and so that was a pretty big problem. That was probably the worst worst person I've ever hired. But then I kind of swung in the wrong direction, and after him, I hired a super squeaky clean, really really smart Ivy League grad that didn't actually have sales floor chops, and so he was super smart, but again couldn't necessarily do the real grunt work of a sales floor leader, running a phone operation. And then my third and I think final mistake, at least with this company, in replacing him, I brought on a sales whiz who was a really, really good seller herself. But just because somebody's a great salesperson doesn't mean they'll be a great sales manager. And I kind of made that mistake. So, in basically each of those three situations, I held on to the person too long. And, in hindsight, of course, 2020, but I would have let those people go, or certainly let them go from their positions and move them sooner rather than later. And then eventually I hired a super, super competent sales manager, but it was kind of too late in given the stage of the business at the time. And so the important lesson learned is the sooner we know that that person isn't right, the better. And it's not just that person on the line, it's the whole company. It's all the rest of your employees. It's all your customers. It's all of your investors. So you really have to think holistically about these things, because it's really not just that person's livelihood at stake. It's everyone else's.
Yeah. It's interesting, all the different ways to fall off the balance beam, huh?
Yes, there are many ways to get it wrong and a couple of ways to get it right. So we keep trying, and hopefully you get it right a little bit more often than you get it wrong.
Yeah. Going in a different direction here, I remember seeing a YouTube video of you, I think it was from the Co-Invent Media Summit or something, and you were talking about how to build a media empire for free on YouTube. And I'm just interested, you've got this best-selling book in the social media space. You're obviously, in the media world in general, and doesn't hurt that you're right in New York. Tell us a little bit about some of your philosophies in that world of the opportunities where maybe people are overdoing it or not realizing the optimal, the best practices.
Yeah, I think a lot of people perceive building their own personal brand as something that is beyond their reach. And I have, I guess, been lucky enough or fortunate enough to meet the right people and create the right opportunities and get the right opportunities to be able to build a very big personal brand and a very large set of followers, et cetera, et cetera. One aspect is of this is that a lot of people think that writing for Inc. or Forbes or Entrepreneur magazine is like unattainable, when in reality, all these magazines have flipped their business models in order to go on the web. So now they have increasingly large numbers of digital contributors, and so if you can generate halfway decent content, you too can write for Inc. or Entrepreneur or Forbes and build up a big part of your brand that way. So certainly writing for Inc. has been a big part of building my brand. And then I was fortunate enough to be one of the early people in the LinkedIn influencer program. And that allowed me to build up quite a big following on LinkedIn. And fortunately for everyone listening, LinkedIn has opened their publishing platform to everyone. So you don't have to be chosen to be a LinkedIn influencer now. You can choose yourself and start writing content and making videos and sharing content on a regular basis. And the thing is, really everyone listening can become their own media company if they just think about things a little differently. And the value is tremendous, right? I don't have to pay social networks to share my content because I have enough followers organically that I can share it myself. And if you too are an entrepreneur or an executive that has something to sell and promote, there are massive benefits to building up your own following in such a way.
Yeah. Last time I checked, don't you have like 650,000 people in your community, or how big is it now?
Yeah, well, I think it's about 670 on LinkedIn, and then across LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, it's about 750,000. So it's a sizable, number of people by, I would say, just about anyone's standards, and it's well targeted. I'd like to think. I mean, we spent. It's funny. I just handed in my manuscript for Likeable Social Media third edition. So I was writing about how, with Likeable Media, our first company, we wanted to reach marketing decision makers. So we didn't spend a lot of money on Facebook advertising, but where we spent money on Facebook advertising to build our audience was in using job title search and marketing specifically to chief marketing officers and senior directors of marketing and vice presidents of marketing. And so it's the numbers are important. Quantity is important, frankly, and anyone that tells you quantity is important is lying to you. But quality is also really important, and so building a following of the right people that can actually buy your stuff or subscribe, or interact with you in an important way. That's also super important, and we've been able to do that, I would say, fairly well.
Oh, that's great. Well, listen, let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor, and then I want to hear more about this.
Great.
Okay, so now that we're back here, Dave, I want to talk about this idea. You have actually done what you wrote a book about, which is unlike a lot of other books, right? Building this audience, 750,000 people. In your mind, what kind of advice do you have? Like, you take someone like us, right? We've done, I don't know, this is probably episode, 225 or episode 250. And it's easy to get into a routine. It's easy to maybe have the next interview sound like the last interview. What kind of advice do you have for somebody like us that wants to be continually growing the audience and knowing that we're adding the value to somebody's life that they want to come back?
Yeah, great question. I think it's really a two-part question. Or two-part answer. The first part, it has to do with internal, and that's probably more important. And that's getting into the right mind frame yourself, such that you're always challenging yourself and asking, how can I do things better than I did the day before? One of my favorite authors and thought leaders is a guy by the name of James Altucher, and he has what he calls the 1% rule. If you can improve 1% a day, it's really not much, but the value of compounding is such that at the end of a week, a month, a year, if you're improving 1% a day in your habits, in your writing output, in your methodology, in your innovation, you're going to improve a heck of a lot. So to me, the most important thing there is having the mindset of continuous improvement. And then the second part is more external. Like you asked me specifically, how can you deliver value for your audience? I would say ask them. It sort of surprises me how few organizations use the tools available to them in social media to gather that sort of insight, right? If you think about it, most people use social media as a megaphone, a platform to talk. When there's even more value in using social media to listen as a 24/7, 365 focus group that it is, and going ahead and using your social platforms and email and really any way that you can reach your existing audience and say, hey, what do you like? What don't you like? What would you like to see more of? Who, in your case, who would you like to see on our show? Who would you like to see us interacting with? And getting that kind of feedback, because once people are bought in, not only is it really valuable feedback, they're more empowered and they're more connected to you. For instance, we crowdsourced the cover to Likeable Social Media third edition. We had 4 covers that our designers we had 3 covers that our designers did and 1 cover that my publisher did, and we took the 4 covers and put it out and to our various social media followings, and we got great feedback on all the social networks. And of course, we ended up going with the cover that got the most votes. And so now, all those people, thousands of people total that saw this, they'll be, first of all, obviously they're a little bit more inclined to buy the book because they were already involved, but they're also just feeling empowered and like they had something to do with it, which they really did.
Yeah, I love it. Okay. I'm just sitting here smiling at like such a simple but such a smart answer. So let's do that right now. Anybody listening, my email address is jess@mylanmedia.com. Please answer all the questions Dave just asked. We would like to know, which episodes have you liked in the past, but who would you want to hear from in the future, or what makes this podcast worth listening to? Please email me directly. Again, mylanmedia.com. I feel like this is like the perfect setup, even though we didn't plan that.
Well, thank you so much. And it's funny because so much of what I have been able to write and put out into the world is super, super simple. Like, I'm the first to say that none of my books are rocket science. In fact, I happen to have a copy of Likeable Social Media. And I'll tell you that Seth Godin, one of my just mentors and just a terrific person that I look up to, he wrote about Likeable Social Media. Alas, common sense is not so common. Dave takes you on a sadly much needed guided tour of how to be human in a digital world. So, like, my books, I'm not telling people rocket science. I'm telling people really basic stuff. But frankly, so often they're basic things that we take for granted or forget or gloss over in an attempt to sort of get to the advanced stuff. But we often lose sight of the basics.
I love it. I'm a huge Seth Godin fan. What did he mean by the human aspect of that comment? Where do you think he was getting at?
Well, the thing with social media is it allows all of us to be human, no matter how big our organizations are. So even if you are a Fortune 50 company, right? If you use social media right, your brand takes on personality traits. It could be fun. It could be playful. It could be kind. It could be helpful. It could be instructive. It could be funny. All these various personality traits. It's social media is this amazing equalizer of helping small companies seem a lot bigger and helping big companies seem a lot smaller and more human and more personal. And that's kind of what the magic of social media can be if applied right.
I love it. Well, we've probably got time for another question here for this before this episode's over. Thinking about all the subjects we've covered so far, you're a guy who gets asked his advice a lot. What's the question that people don't ask that they should be asking?
A great question. What don't people ask that they should be asking? They don't ask about life priorities, and I really meant what I said when I opened the show about my most important job being that as a father. That wasn't lip service. I think that for obvious reasons, most people in the scenario like this end up in, focused on how to make the most money and, hire the right people and build companies that in the best way. And those are all super important. But, I had an amazing a chance meeting on a plane with then 87-year-old man. He was sitting next to me on a plane, and I looked to my right and saw that he was reading a very big font. And I saw it was a speech, and I saw the words, "My dear friend, the late Ted Kennedy." And then I kept reading, and I saw when I authored the GI Bill. So I realized it was a senator. I didn't realize who it was. I introduced myself. Turned out to be Senator Frank Lautenberg from New Jersey. He was a 25-year senator who did quite a bit in government. He wrote the No Smoking on Airlines bill. He had the GI Bill, the age of drinking nationally being 21. But what I didn't know until that meeting was he also founded a little payroll company called ADP that he took public, and 40,000 employees later. He had this 25-year career in business, followed by this amazing 25-year career in government. And as someone with so a lot of political thoughts and potentially ambitions myself, I chatted with him about business and about politics and government, the whole plane ride. And as we're touching down, he says to me, I want to show you a picture of my greatest legacy. And I wondered to myself, is he going to show me a picture of him with one of the presidents, or a bill that he signed into law, or maybe him at the New York Stock Exchange when he took the company public? Instead, he showed me a picture of his 4 children and his 7 grandchildren. And he said, this is my most important legacy, Dave. He said, none of my accomplishments in business or in government will be on my tombstone, but all of their names will. And I found that to be deeply, deeply moving. I've never forgotten it. I ended up having a 3rd child, and his middle name is Franklin, named after Frank Lautenberg. And the sort of sad but very authentic part of the story is that he did pass away a couple years later, and I was able to be at his funeral. And Hillary Clinton spoke and Joe Biden spoke, and it was really like a who's who of people in government that spoke. But more important, all 4 of those children and all 7 of those grandchildren spoke and were just amazing. And so I continue to look up to him and to know that basically every single day I have to remind myself of what my true priorities are and what my true legacy is. And I think that's just something that so many of us in business and in life can take for granted if we don't remind ourselves.
That's great advice. Well, thanks for making time, everybody. Please listen into part 2 of our interview with Dave on the next episode.
Thanks.
Well, that's it for the episode. One other thing I wanted to tell you about, if you remember the guys from Convoy in episodes back, Ken Free and Trent Mano, I went on one of their CEO trips to New York, and I met a guy named Brent Thompson, very successful entrepreneur. He was former CEO of Jive Communications, big company now, I think $300 or $400 million. Anyways, he started a new company called blipbillboards.com. I'm super stoked they're a sponsor now. But I remember a year and some ago when I met him, I thought it was genius. Instead of having to buy 6 months or a year's worth of billboard for thousands of dollars, you can buy 8 seconds at a time for like 10 or 20 cents. You pick what billboard you want it on, what time of day you want it to run. And it just puts so much power in the hands of marketers and CEOs who want to try something and see if it works. You can buy as many or as few as you want, change it as many times as you want. I think now our podcast is being advertised on billboards in like 18 different states because we have these guys as sponsors. We're pretty excited about it. Hope you check out blipbillboards.com. Thanks.